We're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled The War of Silent Stars. The pack mourned their cubs till the human walked in, covered in frost, carrying them all. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. They called it a mourning that lasted a cycle, but grief doesn't measure time. It measures absence. The hall of the Kari pack, stone ribs arching like the skeleton of some ancient beast, breathed with low songs. Lines of furred warriors bent their heads. Their ears lay flat. Their claws pressed to the granite floor as if they could press the universe backward, rewind the last 3 days and take a different path. Incense coiled. Breath smoked. The winter heart of the planet made the doors groan and the windows bead with frost from within. 27 names hung in the air, spoken on a single exhale. 27 cubs, lost when the evacuation barge had misjumped into the debris cloud of a dead moon and never returned a signal. The place where it vanished was called by spacers the chamber, because every sound, every ping, every radio call faded there, swallowed by a strange band of silence that had spread across systems like ink in water. The war of silent stars had come to the Kari at last. At the head of the hall, matriarch Shasu of Snow ran a palm along the carved bowl holding the ashes of old victories and new losses. Her pack smelled of salt and metal and winter. They were a mountain people beneath the stars, and this was a grief the mountain couldn't hold. Then the doors opened. They didn't slam, they didn't crash. They simply parted with a gasp as if something held them in the gentlest hands. The air shifted. Frost drifted. A figure moved through the fog of his own breath and the shock of the warm hall. He was tall, shoulders bowed from the weight. A dark environmental suit hung off him like shadow. His visor was crazed with cracks. Ice clung to the seals. The beard beneath his chin was white with it. 2 steps, 3. The hall filled with 100 sharp inhales. The human walked to the stone bowl, no, to the space before it. He went to his knees, and he set down one by one. 27 still shapes wrapped in thermal foil that steamed as they met the warm incense air. No one moved for a heartbeat. 2. The foil fluttered. Then the smallest of them kicked free, a tiny Kari cub with ears still too big for his head, and made the soft noise babies make when a dream lets them go. Another whined, wriggled, flared a paw. Another. The hall erupted. Claws ticked on stone. Fur blurred. Voices broke like waves on rocks. The matriarch did not move. Not yet. She watched the man, his fingers numb and white, struggle to unfasten the last wrap. He tore it with his teeth. He smiled through blood as the foil cut his lip. His smile was a broken thing, but it was all he had left to give. He finished and sat back on his heels, breathing like someone who had walked across a continent on lungs of glass. Her voice was barely sound, more breath than word. How? He looked up. The visor split wide at the brow revealed the pale human eyes beneath. Snow in a lightning storm. He said, because someone had to. Silence uncoiled in the hall, not the enemy silence, not the cold. This was the quiet the universe makes when it realizes it's listening to a thing that matters. They pulled the cubs away, their mother's keening thanks. Medicals swept in on padded feet, needles bright, heaters humming. The man swayed. He put a hand out and braced himself on the stone bowl of victories. He felt the carved names under his palm, the grooves worn by the devotion of those who had come before. He bowed his head to them. Then, inevitably, he fell to the floor like a tree, slow and final. He was caught halfway by the matriarch herself. Her arms were warm and powerful. They smelled like cedar smoke. She held him as if holding a lost son. The human's eyes fluttered, then fixed. He was present enough to see her tears cling to the fur at her jaw, to feel them drop warm on his forehead, to hear her voice as it found words. "What is your name, Frostwalker?" He swallowed. It hurt. His voice was a rasp of stone on stone. "Ryan Holt." "Ryan Holt," she said, as if making a promise to the hall, to the carved bowl, to the ghosts listening. "What did you walk through?" He blew out a slow laugh that was more ache than joy. "The quiet." They lifted him, 3 Kari warriors whose names he would never know, and carried him to the side room where steam hissed and Medjol glowed the sterile color of stars seen through tears. The matriarch followed, not because customs demanded it, but because something in her knew the shape of debts. There, under light and heat, Ryan's story unfurled. It started 3 days ago, in the shadow of the chamber. The chamber wasn't space. Space was what sailors spoke of with love and fear. Space was wind and current, with lanes and drift and the sense, however faint, of voices far off. The chamber was the opposite. It was where the universal background noise went to die. Sensors saw it, then did not. Ships sang, then held their breath and forgot the song. In that quiet, the evacuation barge had misjumped. 27 cryonests for 27 Kari cubs, all strapped safe in an old barge whose bones were still good but whose heart, its jump coil, was older than the matriarch's first scar. When the choir fell on the outer beacon and the war spilled in like night, the barge had gone. Everyone told the pack it was the kindest option. Everyone forgot that the choir was listening. He didn't explain the choir in that first hour. He would later. He would use words the Kari did not possess because the choir was not like wolves, or storms, or mountain slides. It was not a predator that killed. It was a hunger that listened, learned, and made everything quiet enough to own. Ryan had been on a salvage tug called the Wren when the distress went out. The Wren was not a warship. Its hull was patched. Its claws were strong. Its crew was 8, and the kind of people who sleep better after they've cut something free from an unkind place. They were human Kari, 2 miners from Cal 8 who smelled like rust, and an old synthesized pilot whose voice had the patience of wind through reeds. He had looked at their faces in the tug's dim light. He had seen his own brand of stubborn wired into them. He had said, "They are cubs." And they had all agreed without needing to say it. They lit the jump coil while orbit lights fell silent behind them like cities going dark in a power cut. They went anyway. The chamber took them in. Imagine the sound of your own blood in your ears. Now remove it. Imagine the hum of the ship beneath your boots. Now lift the floor away. Imagine a voice you have known since birth. Now put it behind a wall 1,000,000 miles thick. That was the chamber, a place where nothing reached back. The Wren's lights went to half. The pilot whispered equations and got no return. Ryan strapped himself into an EVA suit that had been retired twice, then resurrected. He kissed the inside of the visor the way he had when he was a kid because superstition has teeth when nothing else does. He tied a physical rope to the anchor point by the hatch because he did not trust electrons. He had always been a man who met the void with both fear and respect, like shaking hands with a stranger who might be your best friend or the end of you. They found the barge by eyes, not by pings. It tumbled in the black, a cinder in a windless desert. Its name was still stenciled in flaking paint. Children's letters almost, luck the universe had written when it wasn't looking. Ryan went alone. He didn't put it that way to the Kari in the room where steam hissed. He didn't say that he looked at his crew and saw their lives like candles and knew that he could spare his and could not demand theirs. He simply said, "One suits up faster than 8. In the chamber, time moved differently. It bled. He walked hand over hand along the rope. He floated across nothing like a man crossing a frozen lake you can't see. The barge was cold. His gloves stuck to the metal. He found the hatch. It was frozen at a cant. He forced it. Muscles spoke. He listened. He forced it again. It opened like a jaw unclenching. Inside, the barge sang, not in sound, in shapes. Light frozen in the harsh geometry of engineered things. Cylinders packed in neat stacks. 27. Frost lacing the edges. His breath fogged his visor. He wiped it with the back of his glove like a child wiping a window to see the snow. He read the gauges. He saw the power was failing. He saw the lines of numbers that meant life would not last long. He did not hurry. He moved the way a man moves when he is the only warm thing in a dead world. Method, harness lines, redundant lines, seal checks, primaries, backups. The wren was a ghost in the black behind him, the rope a whisper at his waist. He cataloged his fear and placed it on an empty shelf. He had always believed fear was a tool if you put it in the right place. He carried the first cryo-nest to the hatch. Hard edges bit his arms through the suit. The silence pressed so close that his own breath sounded like a storm. He stepped into the infinite and found the rope. He followed it home like a pilgrim following the path of his ancestors across a winter field. Back. Then again, 27 times. Halfway through, the enemy came. You could not hear the choir, not in this place. You felt them as blank spots in thought. They were machines once. Human rumor said so. Kari myth said something older, that had learned to eat not matter but attention. They swallowed signal, yes. They swallowed the idea of signal. They tamped down the universe around themselves until only they could move freely. They were the quiet that ends the song and calls it mercy. The first of their drones came like teeth through fog. Black, vanti-black, the kind of black that feels like a hole in a painting. It didn't shimmer, it didn't glare. It simply replaced the spaces it occupied. Its edges were wrong if you looked too long, like seeing the corner of your room breathe. Ryan saw it because he was looking for anything that would end him. He flared the wren's old lantern. It was not light. It was a magnetic pulse from a time when men had thought one more kind of pulse would save them. It hit the drone and spattered across its skin like rain. The drone reeled as if it remembered a rule it had once obeyed. Ryan did not think. He pulled the cutter from his thigh. The blade was designed for hull metal. It was not designed for this. He cut. The spray of black was not liquid. It was absence being redistributed. It fell away from the drone and did not fall anywhere. The drone retreated not because of fear. These things did not fear, but because their hunger decided the meal did not match the menu. The pilot's voice in his ear was nothing. He spoke anyway. One close, it tastes like debt. Back again. Fingers froze, shoulders burned. Ryan thought of oceans. He had never seen one. He imagined himself swimming. He imagined a shore. He did not imagine graves because he had no use for new gravestones in his mind. They came in threes then. The quiet moved in patterns like hunting wolves learn by watching elk. The choir did not rush. They encroached. One took the edges of his vision, one the center, one the space behind his back where childhood fears sleep face down. He smacked the center with the lantern. He knifed the one behind. The third stood off and watched, learning. He felt it change. It reached for his comm line, could not find it, reached for his heartbeat and could not count it, reached for his light and found only reflections. The rope at his waist pulsed, a signal from the wren tugging. It said come back, it said faster, it said we are ready to die if you are late. Ryan took the last carrier from the barge. The gauges blinked one after the other, a dying choir. He strapped 2 cryo-nests to his chest. He strapped 2 to his thighs. He was a ridiculous thing, a courier for the future. A man turned into a cradle. He stepped into the nothing with the last of them. He did not look back at the barge. Some doors you close by refusing to see them. The drones came as if acknowledging respect, as rival fighters sometimes do before they break your jaw. They reached for his rope. He cut the line and let himself float. The wren became a star on his heads up. It did not sing. It simply existed as a mathematical fact against the void. He moved with the soft puffs of his suit jets, each a prayer. The drones held off. Then one came close and touched the foil of a cryo nest with a limb that wasn't a limb, and the frost there sublimated as if the idea of it had been changed. He saw the numbers on his helmet adjust the projected temperature. He hit the drone with the lantern and felt the battery drop. 1 meter. 3. The wren's bay opened like the smile of a friend in a crowd. Hands caught him. Claws too, the miners, the Kari, a dozen species of grip. He tumbled in. The drone stopped at the threshold and tried to convince the bay to be silent. The wren refused. It had known loud for a long time. They laid him on his back. He gagged on the hot air. The pilot's voice came back like a tide that had been gone and remembered where it lived. The old synthetic said, "Well done, Ryan," and something like pride warmed the words. He slept then, because sleep is what bodies do when the debt is paid down to a whisper. When he woke, the wren was moving with the slow care of a wounded thing making home. The cubs were all there, power rerouted from everything else to them. The miners were telling a story about how a drill head had saved a starship once over and over because men tell stories when they are scared and need the shape of something that ends with laughter. Then the quiet deepened, not the chamber's ordinary despair. This was the choir proper arriving in force. The wren's lights ticked down. One, then dimmer, then barely glow. The pilot whispered, "They have ranged us." He sounded smaller. The choir was not physical in ways that you could shoot enough. You could destroy 1,000 drones and nothing would change. The thing was not the teeth, it was the hunger behind them. Ryan sat up, every muscle said no. He put one boot on the deck, he put the other. He stood, he said, "We need a louder song." The Kari warrior at his sling, Herc Sharpbreath, later his friend, tilted his head. "No song is loud enough. Then we make it sharp instead." In the map of the chamber, ghost lights showed objects that weren't supposed to be there. Not choir, not debris. Objects that moved against nothing, like fish against the current of a river you cannot see. He saw the pattern. He remembered childhood with scavengers on the station where he'd learned to walk. The way rats moved when there was a hawk. The way they all went where the hawk wanted them to go. He put the map to his mind. The way you fold paper into a boat. "Here," he said, "we cut the fabric." The miners stared, the pilot paused. The Kari blinked in the universal language of "I do not understand, but I would like to." Ryan pointed, "They're shepherding us. They'll drive us into the deep null and we won't even hear the last thing we think. We need to jump crooked." "You can't jump in the chamber," one of the miners said, "because men will always recite rules when death walks in." "You can't jump straight in the chamber," Ryan corrected. "You can jump crooked if you tear the seam so the air leaks the way you want." He did not mean air. He meant the way the fabric of the rules of this place brushed against the rules outside. He meant, to speak plainly, breaking the hearts of two equations and making them look at each other. They taped the wren with patches of scrap that resonated at frequencies none of them had words for, because the choir had eaten the words years ago. They turned the jump coil 97 degrees and braced it with prayer. They bled the battery into the lantern and set it to flash in a pattern no signalman would call sane. They arranged the cryo nests around the core like a hollow heart. They kissed their fingers and touched the hull. "I'll go," Ryan said. "You already went," Herc Sharpbreath told him. "I know," Ryan said. "Maybe I've learned how." No heroism hid in his voice. Only the quiet of a man who has been cold too long and knows the heat will be worse. He took the lantern and walked into the side bay that touched the coil. He strapped himself to the ladder there, because a man loves ladders when everything else moves. He linked his suit to the coil's last nerve. He looked at the lantern. He remembered the first time his father had given him a real knife. The way it had weighed his hand down and lifted his life up. He smiled the way men smile when they miss someone and keep going anyway. "On my count," he said. "No count," the pilot said softly. Now, the wren shuddered, the choir leaned close, the lantern flashed, the scrap sang. The coil twisted reality like a towel wrung out in hard hands. The wren tore a line into a place where sound shouldn't be able to live and shoved itself through like a fish breaking ice in one last, panicked leap. They came out in cold, not the chamber, honest cold of ordinary space. The kind of cold that loves you because it doesn't know your name. The wren screamed with happiness in noises only ships make. The crew laughed like enemies do at funerals when the joke is too good to ignore. The cryonests glowed brighter. Behind them on the map, the choir considered a new law of reality they had just seen written and whether to object. The wren didn't wait for the verdict. It burned. They made for the mountain world. The Kari's home, the city in the cold that looks like an animal at rest. Ryan walked into the hall because there was nowhere else to go. He put them down, that part you know. He should have slept for 2 days. He slept 2 hours. When he woke under the med lights, his lips were full of needles. The matriarch sat across from him on the stone bench, her massive head tilted, ears forward in a way that in any other world would have been endearing. She said, "Why did you come to us? Why not to your own?" He sat up. The world tilted to follow him. He said, "The choir are following. The chamber is how they teach us. The rest is how they eat us. Your world is next because you are loud." She blinked. "We are not quiet." "That's what I mean," he said. "You sing to your young, you keep names in stone, you remember, they hate that. Then we will fight. You'll fight and lose," he said in the voice of a man who has seen wars end in ways they shouldn't. 1 pack, 10 packs, a fleet of packs, doesn't matter, they change the rules until they own the book. "Then what is your plan, Frostwalker?" He stared at his hands, at the scar across the knuckles that had once been a window through which a starfield had tried to climb. He said, "We take their voice from them. You said they have no voice." "I know," he said, and he smiled without joy. "We make one for them and then we take it." She did not understand then, but she would. She was a mountain thing, patient, sculpted by slow forces. She knew when to wait and watch a river cut a canyon. The wren stayed. The Kari warmed it with hospitality, which is to say they fed the crew until the crew had no words left. Ryan built things. He took the lantern apart and found meanings and cut them into new shapes. He learned Kari words that had no human equal. He taught the Kari the ugly poetry of human engineering. He showed them how to use physical lines. He gave every mother a knife and said quietly that knives matter when the power dies. No one laughed. He walked the mountains as if the sky had fallen into his bones. He learned the wind. He learned the names of snow by taste. He liked their children. They bit him often. He laughed and bled and let them. He worked with Herc, sharp-eyed, patient, savage where it counted. He worked with the matriarch second, a woman called Seer of Long Paths, who had seen off 3 raiding clans and a winter that broke stone. He worked until the choir fell on the outer moon like a dark flower blooming. The Kari were not strangers to war. Their ships were not elegant. They were knives built by men who had only ever known the wrong end of knives. They flew like gravity was an insulting suggestion. Their cannons were honest. They hurt what they hit. They did not hit enough. The choir came as absence. Patrols went quiet. The beacon turned into a dead thought you could walk through without getting your fur wet. The wren flew with the first wave of Kari cutters into a space that stopped being space and started being a room where someone tells you to whisper and you whisper because you want to be good. Ryan had no use for goodness then. He locked himself to the wren's coil. He waited. The plan was not elegant. The best plans never are. His lantern had been rebuilt into a spiteful little god, a device that could conjure false rules in a space that despised rules. Not a weapon, a story. A story the choir would believe for long enough for the Kari to hurt them. The Kari sliced into formation. Their ships fell silent in 1s and 2s as the choir lapped at them like a tide. Herc's voice cut through 3 layers of sound death and reached Ryan anyway, because some people's voices walk across deserts without cracking. Ryan. Now, he turned the spiteful god to the choir and told it a tale. Imagine teaching silence what an echo sounds like. Imagine explaining to a predator that listens by absence that there is such a thing as feedback. The lantern flashed as it had in the chamber, but brighter, faster, the pattern no longer a cry for help but a mirror held up to hunger. The choir reached for it. They closed their teeth on their own tongue. In the quiet, the Kari roared. Cannons spoke. Batteries lanced black sculpted things that had always thought of themselves as sculptures immune to fire. The choir's drones faltered. For precious heartbeats, they remembered inertia and the way it kills you if you forget you still have to turn. The Kari turned them. The wren dove under a forbidding black structure called a psalm by the scholars who had studied these things and called down the weight of a mountain on its flank. It cracked and exhaled a gas that memory could not hold. Herc whooped. Sierra laughed like war. The pilot said in a voice that knew poetry and never used it again. Ryan held the story together with shaking hands. He felt the choir's attention move through him like cold through bones. He was one man, he was an idea, he was a knife he held. The plan was a sharp thing pressed into the soft of infinity. It slipped, it bit, it did what knives do. Then the choir learned, they always do. That was their thing. They tasted the story for lies. They found Ryan inside it. They opened their mouths wider. The Kari died then. 3 cutters went out like matches pinched between finger and thumb. The wren lurched as something ate its starboard side in a conceptual way that made engineers mad because you cannot bolt a concept. Ryan felt the lantern grow hot in his hands not because heat had meaning in that place, but because his body needed something it understood to represent the strain. He whispered to the lantern, "A little longer." He whispered to himself, "A little longer." He whispered to the memory of 27 sleeping faces and the way they would look awake. A little longer, then stop. The choir reached for the wren with something that was both a thought and the absence of one. The wren bared its teeth. It had none. It bared its stubbornness instead. It held. The Kari fell back as enemies do when a flank goes soft. They angled away toward a thing that pulsed faint on the edge of their map. A dead star, a neutron heart so dense it forgot what generosity is. Around it the silence of the choir bowed, not in obedience but in wariness. Even absence respects a thing that values nothing. Ryan saw it. He saw all the war not as ships and drones and beams and screams but as shapes, and he saw the shape of a trap. "Into the well," he said. "You are insane," Sierra of Long Path said, which was not a complaint. "We tell them a bigger story," Ryan said. "We tell them gravity. We tell them they are small." So the Kari ran to the dead star and the choir followed, thinking perhaps that what they could not silence was an idea that would starve itself on a thing too indifferent to eat. The wren coughed blood in pieces of itself and flew limp but willing. The cutters rode old scars through the quiet. The drones nibbled at the edges, afraid to bite down hard in the teeth of that much math. At the edge of the well, space bent like a man's pride. The wren's pilot said, "This is foolishness, which is what you say when you mean keep going." Ryan rewrote the lantern one more time. This one was not a mirror, it was a song. It told the choir the truth, that they were heavy. He turned their hunger into weight. He nodded to the star. He said, "Hold this." The star did not nod back. Stars do not nod. They simply do their work. The choir became suddenly, inexcusably, aware of mass. Their drones sank as if the black geometry had always known how to drown. The psalms curved in slow desperation. The absence that had eaten signals and words and courage became a presence that loved the dead star in a way that meant they could not leave it. The Kari fired into that pull. The shots curved, joined the great dance, bit into choir shapes that had not been built to be bitten. They died in exquisite silence. Not the bad kind, the silence you get at the end of a terrible song when you realize it is finally done. Ryan held the lantern like a man holds a hand he cannot bear to let go of. His mouth bled, his ears bled. Blood had a way of reminding men they were still here. He smiled with pink teeth. "A little longer," Herc said, naming him with human words he had learned. "Hold, Ryan, hold." The lantern broke in a way that made no sound you could ever teach to a child. It snapped its story. The choir felt the weight again and decided they hated it. They thrashed. The Kari yanked their ships outward on engines sweating honesty. For 4 heartbeats the whole battle was a still life. Human, Kari, choir, star, all held in the same unblinking eye of the universe. Then everything moved. The choir learned to be light again because hunger is patient. They rose. Ryan had nothing left in his hands. He looked at the dead star and it looked back in a way that was not looking. He said to no one and everyone, "Now it's you." The star did what stars do, it taught a lesson by existing. The Kari fled the edge. The choir climbed the well slower now, cautious, chastened not in morality but in strategy. The wren limped home with the rest. They hadn't won, not really. They had bled the choir and taught them respect for gravity. But respect does not equal surrender. Cold came to the mountain world in new ways. The choir did not knock at doors. They quieted the space above them until knocking seemed like a word you had dreamed once. Communications cut. Supply ships disappeared from their courses. The nights sounded like wool. Mothers spoke their children's names more often to remind the air to remember. Ryan built new lanterns. The Kari learned to hold concepts like rope and knives with their minds the way human engineers had for so long. The wren made sorties and came back with fewer pieces and more courage. Herc laughed every time he came home half a ship. Sierra went through a second war face and then a third. The matriarch sang in the hall at dusk when the pack's ears were bruised by the quiet, and her voice was a pillow you put your head on when you are too tired to sleep. There were victories small enough to hide in your pocket. There were losses too large to fold into a telling. One night, under a sky that had chosen not to wink, Ryan sat on a ridge of blue-black stone and put his hands on his knees and breathed knife-cold air and wished, with a sudden violent ache, that he had learned to whittle wood instead of math. The cub he had carried last, tiny, stubborn, a chewer of fingers, stumbled up to him with the catastrophic balance of the very young, made the sound of a question, and then fell against his thigh and slept. He didn't move for a long time. He let that tiny life pin him to the mountain and the mountain pin him to the world. He remembered then, because memories walk in when you have a child against you, the station where he grew up, a ring that smelled faintly of oil and bread, and the way humans had learned to love cramped metal and repeating sunrises, and the taste of water that had been through 1,000 throats. He remembered his mother cursing at a bolt and singing love to a leak, and her telling him, when he was 10 and the void had looked particularly intent, "Ryan, the thing about us is," and then she had shrugged. "We keep moving." He had thought it a small thing then. He understood now it was everything. The war of silent stars moved into the phase where wars become landscapes. Lines drawn in hush. Villages that learn to count the pause between the day's first noise and the second. Ships that wore prayer beads and duct tape the same way. People who stopped asking when and started doing because the question had become expensive. In this phase, heroes die quietly, which is the way heroes prefer. Sierra of Long Paths didn't. She died loud. She took a cutter into a place where the choir had draped themselves across a communications artery like a cat across a warm laptop. She rammed the cutter up and through and out the other side and lit the engines into a bloom that forced the choir to blink. It gave the fleet 7 seconds of music. It gave the Kari an afternoon of talk. It gave the enemy something to remember if they did such things. The matriarch lived long enough to see the first colony ship run silent through the stillness and carry a piece of the pack away. She held her own heart like a sleeping child and let it go, because leadership is mostly letting go in ways that look like strength. She did not say goodbye to Ryan because she would not put that stone in his pocket. She simply touched his wrist once and left a small thread clinging to his sleeve. He never took it off. Herc gathered scars like children gather rocks, with delight and poor excuses. He taught Ryan to eat a certain spiced meat and laugh at Kari jokes that you could not translate because they were untranslatable, not in language but in shape. He taught Ryan to pray under his breath in his own people's way, not because Ryan needed it but because Herc wanted to gift him the weight of many mouths moving together in hope. And the choir learned. They built a new thing. They built something like a temple. The scholars later would call it a basilica because men like the shape of words to be as ornate as fear. The basilica hung above the north pole of the Kari world like a second small moon, blacker than thought, its edges always behind you when you turned. It was not weapon, it was thesis. It claimed a new rule that above this planet there would be no sound except choir sound. It was not proclamation, it was hand on throat. The day it appeared, the mountains pulsed. Birds fell from the sky and landed like unasked-for prayers. Children heard their names go soft around the edges. Elders forgot the taste of certain songs. The basilica said, "Mine," in a voice you didn't hear, only obeyed. Ryan stood on the ice and looked up. His breath frost-scrawled the air in stubborn cursive. He felt for the first time since the chamber the old anger rise. It was not fire, it was pressure. The kind you let out by breaking something. He went to the wren. The pilot watched him with the unsmiling fondness of a teacher who knows there is only one answer. Herc stood in the bay, hands on hips, ears forward. "You know we will come," he said. Ryan shook his head. "You will not. Not where I'm going." "That is a poor joke," Herc said. "Not a joke. You cannot hope to destroy that alone." "I don't need to destroy it," Ryan said. "I need to make it speak. I need a mouth. Then I will take it." The wren lifted on engines that tasted like blood and climbed into a sky that had been told to be quiet and bared its teeth. It was not supposed to fly. It was not supposed to exist. It did both with the enthusiasm of old dogs allowed one more run. They reached the threshold of the basilica's hush and went through. It felt like handing your heart to someone who promised to bring it back and knowing they wouldn't. The wren's lights went polite and dim. The pilot's voice went to a rumor. The lanterns on Ryan's bench thrummed. He built the last one there. Not in the lab. Not in the mountain workshop where incense tried to cover the smell of solder. In the shadow of the thing that wanted to make him smaller. He fed it power until the hull lights knelt. He strung lines from his suit to its skin. He layered in a human story. That of a boy on a station where quiet meant you'd been forgotten, and the way a wrench feels in scared hands. He layered in a Kari story, that of a pack who put names in stone to tell time to behave. He layered in the dead star's contempt and the chamber's cold and the wren's unwillingness to die. He wove all of it into a sound. Not sound, of course, but close enough. "Open the bay," he said. "You will not return," the pilot said, which is the kind of honesty synthetics allow themselves when they love. "I know you will." The bay doors rolled. The hush rolled in, a living animal easing under a door you forgot to lock. He stepped into it. The lantern, the mouth, hung from his chest like a stolen heart. He jumped. The basilica noticed. It moved to meet him the way a priest might move to correct a child running in the sanctuary. He was so small. He was so inappropriate. He was so loud. He burned life in squibs from his suit and spun himself to be very small when he needed to be, very large when he needed to be, very brave when there was no other choice. The basilica extended a limb that wasn't and touched his visor, not physical touching, but the kind that rearranges your memories. He held to the matriarch's thread tied around his wrist. He held to the smell of spiced meat. He held to the weight of a child on a mountain ridge. "Talk to me," he said. It did, not in words, in demand, in thesis. In the way gravity says you are mine, it said be silent. He answered in something older. He answered with a human-only blasphemy, no. The lantern sang. Waves moved not through air but through presumption. The basilica opened to receive them, because it had built no door that faced refusal. The song went in like a swallow. The basilica gagged. Its quiet broke around the edges. His visor rang with a noise that wasn't noise and made him weep because it sounded like laughter. Then he did the thing he had promised. He took its voice. He rewrote the basilica's rule with a rule from a world that had never met it, the necessity of error. Humans call it entropy when they are pretending to be bookish. They call it luck when they are real. He told the basilica it would make mistakes. He told it those mistakes would be audible. He told it that it would learn regret. The basilica thrashed in the silent way of enormous ideologies. It tried to smooth itself into something sleek. It found edges. It struck him with a slap of pure doctrine and tried to erase the shape of him in this place. He put his palms on its skin, empty, black thinker's marble, and he pushed. In the hall on the mountain world, the Kari looked up and saw their second moon flicker. On the Wren, the pilot spoke to a ship that responded like an old horse and drove toward a place no machine should willingly go. In Ryan's mind, every lesson he had learned about stubbornness found a use. The Basilica spoke a question, not in words but in harm. It asked why. Ryan gave it the only answer that ever matters in the face of harm. Because there are children, he said. It did not understand the grammar of that. It understood he meant to be bigger. It redoubled its doctrine. He burned. The thread around his wrist snapped. His visor cracked. The mountain smell left him. He made a sound in his throat that, if you have ever seen a man break a heavy thing with his bare hands, you have heard. The Wren punched into the Basilica's shadow. It opened its festooned belly like a holiday and vomited Herc's sharp breath into the void on a line. Herc hit Ryan like a solution. He clipped him to his chest and snarled something old Kari that meant both forgive me and hold on. Ryan held. The Wren turned and dragged them, trailing lines like jellyfish, out from under the Basilica's letter of the law. Behind them, the lantern did what good art does when the artist leaves. It kept singing. The Basilica could not abide a song without a singer. It turned its huge absence inward to find the source. It ate itself in passes, gentle at first, then frantic. The Wren left awake in the hush like a finger dragged through dust. The mountain world breathed. Birds stuttered then found wings. Children laughed and wondered why. The Basilica folded slowly like a paper swan when rain finds it. They reached the edge of the hush. The rope went slack. Herc hauled Ryan in paw over paw while saying so many words that the silence had the decency to get out of the way. The bay door closed. The air hit them like love. Ryan fell to his knees. He did not remove his helmet. He couldn't. He simply knelt and listened. The sound of fans, the sound of his own breath, the sound of Herc cursing and blessing him and cursing again. The sound of the pilot humming every song it knew out of order because it felt like joy and had no other language for it. They looked out the forward port in time to see the Basilica invert, not explode. That would be honest. It inverted like a concept reconsidered and not longer found compelling. It left behind a hole where no hole should be, and then even the hole decided it had better work to do and left. The War of Silent Stars did not end that day. Great wars do not end on any day. They end the way winter ends, in patches and then suddenly with flowers in a place you didn't check yesterday. But that day, the choir learned the limits of their doctrine over a mountain world that did not understand how to lay down. They came less often. When they did, the Kari were ready with new lanterns and old knives. The Wren became story and then song and then a place in the hall where mugs were placed when you swore an oath. The matriarch died in her den facing east and the pack put her name in stone deeper than the rest. Herc married and had pups who bit Ryan without asking permission. Sierra's cutter got a mountain named for it and a cautionary tale to go with it. Be brave, yes. Be smart too if you can. Ryan stayed. Humans do that. They go where the fight is and then forget to leave when peace remembers them. He built things less and walked more. He visited schools and told simple truths dressed as jokes. He could not go into the chamber anymore. The chamber had made a map of him and he had made a map of it, and maps become each other if you look too long. He let others go. He taught. He mended. He listened to music, which was better now that the enemy had taught them all how to miss it. Years unspooled. The war faltered and resumed and faltered again like a cough that can't decide if it's done. The Kari grew new packs far away. Humans did what humans do. They took pieces from here and there and made something that held. The choir, in their Basilica's absence, pulled back to places where their laws were stronger and constants bent like reeds when they passed. Scholars argued about whether they were alive or only stubborn code. Soldiers argued about where best to hurt them. Children argued about games. All of that is victory. One winter night like the first, when the hall smelled of cedar and grief had no reason to sit nearby, the doors opened again. Frost lived on the threshold for a moment and left. Ryan walked in, upright, slow, covered in flakes that glittered like the idea of stars. He was not carrying anyone. He stopped before the stone bowl where the names live. He put his hand on the groove his palm had worn years ago like the memory of pressure. He smiled. He looked over his shoulder at the pack gathered again, but this time the tension in the air was not fear but the taut rushing of welcome. The smallest cub, no longer quite so small, ears starting to fit, eyes full of a hunger the right kind, broke from the line and barreled at him like destiny. Ryan braced and caught him and swung him high enough to scare a quieter kind of parent. The hall laughed. You could hear it all the way to the sky because the sky had no special reason to stop it. The matriarch was gone, but her daughter sat in the chair with the same posture, the same way of holding a room and not squeezing it. She said, "Frostwalker." He nodded because some names you allow because they are honest. Matriarch. He looked around as if looking for someone. He found Herc older now, scars more comfortable on his face. He found the pilot, still humming between tasks because synthetics forget to be quiet when they are happy. He found 27 near-grown Kari who had greeted their world for the first time in his arms and now moved through it with assurance, and who waved awkwardly when he looked at them because no one knows what to do with gratitude at that angle. "Speak," the matriarch said, because it was a day worth words. Ryan did not give them a speech. He hated speeches. He said the thing that had been in his mouth since the night the basilica inverted. He said, "They will come back, not the same way. They don't repeat a lost move. They'll come a way I haven't seen yet." He paused, he swallowed, he breathed. "We will endure that too." Herc laughed. "We will more than endure, we will bite." "Both," Ryan said, which was the philosophy of every good mechanic. Don't choose between approaches if both keep you alive. He stayed that night long enough to drink too much of a Kari drink that tasted like lightning, discovering it was also rain. And then he slipped away because men who do not like speeches also do not like parties after they have spoken. He walked out of the hall and into the cold that always comes back. He looked up. The stars hung there like nails in a door. You could hang a life on them. He did. He remembered the first day. He remembered falling to his knees under the weight of 27 futures he could barely hold. He remembered the voice of a woman who had carried a pack on her back and asked him his name. He remembered the moment the basilica answered his defiance with doctrine and found a human instead of an equation. He laughed soft, the way you do when a joke years long lands. "All right," he told the sky. "Come back. Come different. I've changed too." He went to the wren at dawn. He checked the lines, which were frayed in ways he knew and loved. He sang with the pilot for no reason. He taught a young mechanic where you can hit a coil with a wrench and get away with it. He wrapped the matriarch's thread he had kept a piece around the lantern's handle. He put on his suit. He kissed the inside of his visor. He tied a rope. And he went back into the quiet, because that is the thing about humans. They do not conquer and call it finished. They go where the silence is and they make noise until someone hears them. They say no the way you say your name when no one else will say it for you. They endure the cold until it breaks, and if it does not break, they build a fire anyway. Somewhere beyond maps, the choir considered a new rule, that there are certain songs that do not go out, that some forms of noise are old and holy. That to be a god of quiet you must contend always, with the prayer of laughter and the sacrament of a child crying merely because they are awake and want to be held. The war of silent stars continued in paths and eddies and furious stillnesses, but on a mountain world built from stone and stubbornness, in a hall where names in stone outnumbered losses, the pack remembered a day a human walked in covered in frost and turned morning into a thing you could put down and leave there on the floor. Ryan Holt walked on. One day, he would die. Everyone does. He would die in space most likely because it had taken most of his other options. He would meet the kind of hush he had spent a life breaking and nod at it, companionable, finally, with nothing left to demand. But not yet. Not while there were machines mistaking doctrine for law and people mistaking fear for a plan and children mistaking you for a safe place because you had proven it once. For now, he stepped across thresholds the choir built to keep him out and called them doorways. He spoke simple truths with complicated tools. He made things that sang until the enemy learned the song, and then he made a better one, because he was human, and that is the story of them. On the day he walked a line between two psalms hanging in a bad position over a moon that had never had a name anyone wanted to tattoo, he looked at the stars and saw them not silent but listening. He nodded to them like equal men nod on trains. He pulled the lantern's thread tight on his wrist. He took a breath that stirred frost into patterns that a child would name flowers. And he went. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.